Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the protests we've seen all over the world as a result of the blasphemous remarks coming from BJP leaders. We'll also be talking about the plight of minorities and the suffering of, particularly we've seen Muslims suffer as far, at the hands of merciless Indian troops. We've also seen, action by the BJP government against Muslims also, and generally speaking against minorities also. The change overall in India as far as the plight of minorities. We've seen them being beaten, we've seen them being treated mercilessly, brutality in India. As far as minorities are concerned, there has been a call for joint action by the United Nations against these kind of activities that are now being seen in India for a while now. We'll be talking about all of that today on Perspective. I have with me Nasir Ali Khan, who's a former ambassador. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Nasir Janjua, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us. We have with us Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodi, who's a former defense minister. Thank you for joining us. And we are joined by John Dayal, who is an Indian HR activist and member of NIC. Thank you for being with us. Nasir Sahab, let's start off with you. We've seen, for a while now, we've seen the treatment of minorities in India. We've seen the way that they're being treated. We've seen, the brutality there, and that's not new. But in the last, we've also seen the blasphemous remarks, and those have been condemned from all over the world. There's no doubt about that. But of course, more is needed, more action from the world in general. Of course, we've also asked the UN. All of that is there. But consistently, we haven't seen the kind of reaction one would like from the world. The building up overall of this kind of treatment, it's been building up for a while now in India, the treatment of minorities, the way that their treatment, it's just inhumane. And Kashmir was something that was talked about earlier, but now it seems like India is becoming another Kashmir. Would you agree with that?
You see, as far as the world is concerned, I think the world would only take notice if all the Muslim countries were to unite in this. Now, in the recent past, I would say in the last 8 years or so, the BJP government has basically tried to change the whole ideology of India from a secular state to basically a Hindu state and a majoritarian state. Now, when we talk about minorities, notice that the so-called Muslim minority, if it were a country on its own, it would probably be the 6th largest country in the world. So, it is a huge number of people. And as such, the policy just try to pander to the Hindus and to basically distract them from their social, health, law and order problems is something that seems to be working at this stage. Now, coming to this incident in the recent past, yes, a lot of persecution of Muslims has taken place in the rest of India apart from what is happening in Kashmir.
Right.
But a lot of the Muslim countries largely sort of consider it as an internal matter of India, which is unfortunate. Pakistan is one of the few countries that would raise its voice on any major incident like that would happen. But this recent incident, which happened on a television program, a spokesperson of the BJP has actually spoken some blasphemous things against our Holy Prophet ﷺ. And this has caused a large number of Islamic countries to take note of it, take serious note of it.
Right.
And it has made them, call the Indian ambassadors to démarche them, and of course there is this movement where they're also boycotting Indian goods.
Right.
Now, in the thinking, I mean, a person like Modi right now is in a bit of a dilemma, in the sense that on the one hand he probably wants to apologize or make up for this in some way. But on the other hand, well, because so much is at stake, there is a statement, for instance.
You think that there's some remorse there? Let's ask John Dayal. I'll come back to you, Nasir. John, do you think that's true? I hope you've been following Nasir Saab when he says that. Do you think there's some remorse, or there's some, if not remorse, then some cognizance of the consequences that can arise because of these remarks? Do you think that there is that at all? How would you answer that? I think there's a problem with audio. I can't seem to hear. Do you, Nasir Saab, it's the same question from you. Do you think that when...
MAHRUKH, I tend to agree generally with what the Ambassador Saab was saying. I just have to add something.
Ji.
BJP, if you look at their history, in the last 2 elections, they have come into power on the single agenda of Islamophobia,
right,
anti-Muslim bashing. Otherwise, there was nothing unifying them in India.
In fact, their performance was quite bad.
Exactly what I was going to say is that before these 2 elections, they had a very dismal performance in the Indian elections. So somebody in their research wing sat down and said, look, what is that thing that can bag us the votes, because we are in a majority, and there's only one thing that is anti-Muslim rhetoric. And that's when their RSS ideology, which was the original founding ideology of BJP, that came to fore. And that is why you find people, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, he's a known terrorist. The Prime Minister has himself admitted his role in the 1971 fiasco. He was the biggest terrorist who was not even allowed to get into the US because he was a killer in Gujarat. And unfortunately, now he's the Prime Minister of the country. So this whole thing, and unfortunately, because BJP has come on this slogan of Hindutva and making this a Hindu state rather than their secular ideology, which the Gandhiji was the champion of. Now this is not going to go away. What do we do?
You're saying that this is in essence a stamp that they now have to live with, because they came on this kind of slogan.
Because BJP knows this sells, anti-Muslim bashing sells, and it gets them the votes. So why would they change their slogan? Well, they have suspended the membership of Nupur Sharma and Naveen Jandal. That is all lip service. You'll find a few weeks later they'll all be back in business. What we need, and I'm sorry to say, he is more appropriate to advise, going to the United Nations will not give you any results. But India is a huge economy, and their vested interests of the Western countries in India will not make them demarche India the way we want it to. The only demarche, or the only way we can sanction them, is if OIC becomes really effective.
Right. But Ambassador Saab, you, I think, were about to say that they now have to balance that, if I'm not wrong. And, could you clarify? Because, the fact that that ideology is there, that stamp is there. On the other hand, there are the consequences that may follow from these kind of remarks.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that that Modi has a level of remorse about it.
Okay.
It's just that, you see, the trade that they have with the West Asian countries or the Middle East, the GCC, is about $90 billion.
Right.
There are large investments in Reliance Industries coming from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Aramco is investing in the Reliance Petro arm. They are also investing about $1.2 billion in a refinery, etc. So there is all this money at stake.
Okay.
And if you notice, Modi is largely supported with very, very big businessmen, especially from Gujarat, people like Adani's and the Ambani. And recently, a minister in Sri Lanka actually made a statement that Modi personally interceded and actually asked us to give a certain 500 megawatt wind power project to Adani without any international competitive bidding. Similarly, there's been a case in Australia for the mines. So this is something, money is very important to them.
Of course.
It's not remorse. It's right now damage control. It's firefighting. But on the one hand, he's got to do this to save the money. On the other hand, largely his constituency is not apologetic about it.
Right.
You see, so he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to annoy them either. That's the dilemma that I feel. But as mentioned right now, I think unless and until at least the OIC, and by the way, they have kind of rejected the OIC by saying it's a very ineffective organization and it's simply working on a foreign agenda. So it shows the sort of respect that the Indians have for the OIC.
Empowering the OIC is one thing. You know, Nasab, you were talking about that also. Ambassador Saab is agreeing with that also. But other than the fact that, do you think that India can come back from this? Because, you know, the larger concern should be that we are seeing this plight of minorities, this situation arise. We saw what happened, you know, a couple of months ago with the protests that arose again, you know, as a result of this kind of treatment. This is again another incident. These incidences now keep on happening. Do you think that India can step away from this? It's likely to escalate further, is it not, this kind of environment?
Unfortunately, India is not coming back. 5th of August 2019, they enacted laws, they have never repealed them. We've been yelling, we've been having, you know, a counter right in front of Serena. We've been telling the entire world that India is doing this. They have been actually settling Hindus in Kashmir. We have not been able to do anything, unfortunately. It is because somehow or the other, well, whatever they say about OIC, now there's a lot of economic interest for those OIC countries or the Middle Eastern countries. If they put their economic interests aside, and especially on the case of, forget about the treatment of Muslims for one moment. The issue of the blasphemy against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nothing is more important to anybody in Muslims. And they should take stock of this. They have the leadership capability. Saudis, the UAE, Qatar, Jordan, and all these countries.
They need to come together.
They need to come together and demarch them really, really bad. There's a huge diaspora. Indian population in these countries is much more, and the amount of money that's going back from the expats into India is actually supporting their economy. They're going to be badly hit if these countries take stock of this situation.
I want to go to John. There was earlier an issue with the audio. John, what is the overall feeling in India at this time, you know, after these remarks? Of course, Muslims form a large chunk of the population there. You know, overall, how is this affecting people in India? Is it affecting them at all? How is it affecting the leadership, BJP leadership also?
I would dismiss this technical hiccup in the acoustics as minor, considering that anybody who speaks now against the government in India faces far more non-technical issues in free speech.
Right.
Yeah, having said that, you know, I think there are two different things, and I have a take on this.
Okay.
The blasphemy against the Prophet, and peace be upon him, is a major issue. There's no getting away from it.
Right.
The treatment of religious minorities, including mine, Christians and Muslims, over the last 8 years is a different issue.
Okay.
I would like to question the world. Why did they not speak when Christians were being terrorized, when Muslims were being terrorized from day one, when Mr. Modi took over, when the RSS started with his muscles, when killers were elected to parliament, when all those things happened, when the bulldozer came against Muslims, long before this blasphemous act took place. The world silence did, in a way, embolden these people. The world silence, because America wanted to sell arms, France and England want to sell arms. And Pakistan's voice is not heard in India, quite obviously, because relations between the two countries aren't of a nature. Having said that, that has emboldened India. It can get away with telling the US that we dismiss your USEF report, Department of State report. It dismisses the United Nations. It dismisses European Union reports. And this courage has come from the way the world has treated it with kid gloves all these years. The blasphemy comes. What is terrible about it is that just now the government is punishing the protesters against the blasphemy. The governments of Uttar Pradesh and Delhi are not punishing the perpetrators. They're suspended, but that means nothing. They're not under arrest. Suspension from political parties, nothing. They're suspended today, tomorrow they'll be back. But the fact that the government is not at all punishing these people, and in punishing the protesters, is to me as a civil rights activist of great importance. And I would like that to be noticed also.
I'm going to, I will just come back to you. I'm going to go to Lieutenant General Lodi ji. General Sahab, do you agree? You think that, overall in terms of course, I think John is right when he says that, of course, two issues must be looked at separately, and there's no denying that the blasphemy is a huge issue for all Muslims. Then there's the issue of the OIC, empowering the OIC also. Of course, the kind of a reaction that should have come. Do you think that, perhaps it's not sufficient?
Thank you. I think blasphemy, as Mr. John indicate, his talk indicates, is not only an issue for Muslims. It is an issue for the world at large, because we all know that UNO passed a resolution last time that blasphemous comments should be avoided, and it will be taken as a negative thing against any country. We all know that as far as secularism is concerned, India, as far as India is concerned, it has gone past. It is a thing of the past now. But it is very important, and I'm delighted to listen to Mr. John, that the resistance from within the Indian polity and from within the Indian society, that is very important. Of course, the external pressures do count, and we have been talking about it, and I will also say a few words about it. But the internal resistance, the innate resistance within the society is very important.
Okay.
And that is happening. Of course, it is being ruthlessly suppressed, as friend John was saying. But you cannot suppress the sentiments of people for a very long time. So it will come out again and again, and it will create a problem, and ultimately, things might balance out. This time, you've also noticed.
One of the issues that we keep talking about, earlier on, before the very, very sad incident happened, was like, the treatment of minorities, and overall things have happened, from time to time, and that has escalated the situation in India. Of course, again, we've been talking here about the balancing of the tag that the BJP has adopted, of being anti-Muslim, of the extremism that is somehow what they seem to bank their voter base, their votes on, and on the other hand, the ramifications of this kind of an action from across the board. Of course, one feels that something will have to be done sooner or later for there to be, things to change, because things are otherwise getting worse and worse.
True. You're right that the BJP government's politics are exclusive in nature and not inclusive. They have realized that if they can get the majority votes of the extremist Hindus, which probably it seems they are in majority in India, so they can remain in power. So that tactics is succeeding. But then I can also see that the sane elements within India are also resisting. You have seen writers, you have seen, other sane minds talking about it.
Is that enough? That is the question, right? Because we do see resistance over, and I think John, of course, we'll go to John on that also. But is that enough? Because that is what happens. Some incident happens and things escalate, and we see a reaction. But there doesn't seem to be the kind of consistency.
I was coming to the other element. What I wanted to say is that it may not be enough, but it is a must that there should be internal resistance also. That is there. Now, as far as the external pressure is concerned, I think in this case, in the blasphemy case, you must have seen that there is a very strong reaction from the Gulf states. Okay, if they don't think if the Indian they just summarily disposes of OIC, they can't say so about GCC. They have very strong relations, as one of the brothers was talking about, and they have a lot of trade with them. So if a very strong reaction has come from that corner, and they have all even talked of boycotting some of the items, Indian items, so it means some serious reaction has already taken place. Yes, we need to expand it to the international level. It should not be only Muslim limited reaction, it should be a world reaction. And for that, I agree that still a lot has to be done. And I think it should not be taken as a Muslim issue. It should be taken as a normal human issue, that we cannot desecrate each other's, pious personalities or even each other's ideas. We all have a right to believe in whatever we want to, whatever we wish to. So if today, there are such comments against Muslim, beliefs, tomorrow there can be such comments on other religions also. So principally it is wrong. So principally I would suggest that instead of making it a Muslim issue, which it is there's no doubt about it, and the reaction has come, and more strong reactions will be coming, especially from countries, around Pakistan, even Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan. You'll find that, after the Gulf states, even our reaction has been strong. But we must convert this into a world reaction, and that is possible because the issue is such that if we project it properly, it will invoke a response.
Nasir Sahab, empowering the OIC, how do you think, is that a possibility? How can we go about it? Why has there not been, I mean, we've seen off and on an effort to revive, the power there, but it doesn't seem to have worked so far. What are your thoughts on that?
You see, a lot of the countries in the OIC are not really democracies that need to go back, the governments that have to go back to the electorate and have to be very sensitive to public opinion and things like that. But when something like this happens, even they are well aware of what their public feels. And these are things that compel them to take an action. How do you actually strengthen the OIC? Simply through unity. When they have a common purpose, when all their interests converge somewhere, then you get a result out of it. There is no single group or single government or single person. But you know that the work that was done recently from Pakistan in terms of Islamophobia and the fight against it, and then they achieved a special day at the United Nations. 15th of March is going to be every year a day against Islamophobia. So these are this is progress in small steps. There is no single entity or a big charismatic leader
to unite the Muslim Ummah, so to speak,
and empower them. Empowerment comes, number one, from unity, and secondly, when you are relevant in the world. Over 50 countries with a lot of natural resources are bound to be effective as long as they realize that there is strength in unity. Now, in a lot of cases, for example, India, the relationship that it had with a lot of the Gulf countries which were not democratic, although they were not democratic, they still admired the fact that India is a multicultural, multi-religious society where there is greater tolerance compared to other countries. And that was one of the reasons that they encouraged labor from India to come and work there. Now this is not a minor thing as far as India is concerned. I see a lot of commentators dismiss this, saying that after all, if we have 10 million people there, they're not there for free. They're actually working, they contribute, and they compete, and that's how they're there, and these countries need them. That is not entirely true. If the impression of India is no longer that of a tolerant society, then it will damage their reputation.
On that point, Nasir, as far as the impression of India is concerned, which is what Ambassador Saab is saying, they've been doing this for a while, but somehow have we not been able to, conceivably or effectively get it out there to the world, or the world is just ignoring it because, of course, of their, economic clout as a nation, all of, the fact that it's a huge market, all of those things. But the spillover effect, of course, is also another factor as far as India and the treatment of extremist treatment is concerned, of the minorities.
MAHRUKH, unfortunately, this is a harsh reality that India, being a big, huge market, second largest populated country in the world, so everybody looks at them as a market that they want to go into. So they somehow do not, despite the fact whatever they keep doing, as John was rightly saying, it's not just the issue of Muslims. Christians have been marginalized in India, and they are equally badly treated. Now the world must see, if something happened in East Timor, they all woke up and gave them independence because it was against a Muslim country. In this particular case, now again the Christians, forget about the Muslims for a moment, again the Christians are being marginalized. Nobody talks about it because it's not a Muslim country. I can bet if this was a Muslim country, the Christians in India would have taken their independence long time ago. This is the irony. Now the problem is the European Union, the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, everybody, they look at India as a big market. But I know, and we all know, that that's not going to change.
But we have to accept the reality of there being double standards and then move forward, right? I mean,
so that the only way, as the Ambassador Saab was saying, we could only, since we cannot influence the West, what we could hope that we could unite the Muslim Ummah, as the ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan brought everybody here on the table, and he got, with his influence or his efforts, 15th of March declared as the Day Against Islamophobia. Those are baby steps, but they were steps in the right direction. Now the Ummah needs to realize that if we don't do this, this is not going to stop. Right. Indians are not going to stop. Somebody like Charlie Hebdo in France is not going to stop. What are you going to do then?
So we need that kind of unity across the board from the Muslim.
As you were saying also.
Oh, I see. John, in terms of the fact, in terms of what we're talking about, the reality of there being, of course, India's own economic situation for the world, the reality of that, their clout, the double standards of the world, do you think that those things are going to change? Is it ever going to, the balance ever going to tilt in the favor of calling it like it is, or is it always going to be, of course, the reality of diplomatic relations is always, to an extent dictated by the economic realities. So we can't ignore that also.
It will be an ideal world when the world is about to end, as your book and my book say. No, let's not go into that. Let's also not go into the facts or the argument, why are Christians not demanding independence? We are everywhere in India, in every district, possibly every village. And independence is impossible and not an issue that we're talking about. Right. But as I was saying something, I think the point was missed. Human rights, including blasphemy, are an instrument of foreign policy. The US is quiet on China. Pakistan is quiet on China. Everybody is quiet in China, even though the US is trying to get India both into a military and a diplomatic bloc against China. In fact, the two generals, the Secretary of State and the Chief of the General Staff, their statements the last 4 or 5 days have been, if I were a Chinese or even an international observer, I would be alarmed at the way that they're pushing India into a bigger confrontation with China. I would be really, really alarmed. But that's a terrible thing. But the point is, the West particularly, and even the GCC, they weigh their moves. For them, the plight of Indian Muslims or Indian Christians or Indian democracy, the plight of other Indians, Hindus included, is not an issue. What just now, because the spotlight is on the blasphemy, they're mouthing it. But tomorrow, I can assure you, they'll be quietly dealing with India as they've always done, because 10 million people working in the Gulf, both India and the Gulf are tied together in a manner that they cannot just even think of operating without each other. They will have to find. India would have to. And this is what we're demanding here. The Prime Minister must speak. He must condemn Islamophobia. Not that it will quieten down the Hindus. Already there's lots of street movement in defense of this girl who said all those terrible things against the Prophet, peace be upon him. There are movements, there are demonstrations in towns calling her a heroine, the bravest woman who has ever lived in the last 10,000 years. All those things are also reality. So Mr. Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, would have to really do some deep thinking and bring the country back from the brink. He's the one man who holds the key. And with him, he can...
But John, we haven't seen, I mean, it's heartening to see.
We have not seen, but just now, the milk is on the boil. The oceans are roiling. Just now, earlier I told you, when it was just Muslims being beaten up or Christians being beaten up, without this cutting, this ban, this global outrage against blasphemy, he could quite easily barter. He could easily dialogue with individual countries and quieten them down and say these are sporadic instances, they don't amount to nothing. But just now, when his party's official spokesperson, the most fighting spokesperson that the BJP had, said all those things, nobody believes that she could have said that without the patronage of the party president, Mr. Nadda, who said nothing unless Mr. Modi's hand is on him. So ultimately, everybody and his grandfather is clear that Mr. Modi so far was supporting that woman. he has to now come out and declare on TV, on national TV, on international TV. And he's never held a press conference, so it'll have to be his Mann Ki Baat. He must say categorically that the Prophet is as holy in India as in any Islamic country, that Christ and the Sikh gurus are as holy, that he will not countenance Islamophobia, that he will not tolerate insult to religions, and also while saying that he will not tolerate violence against Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, communists, and secular.
Let me go to General Sahib. General Sahib, you agree with this? You think that,
I think, right. I think John Sahib has brought forth a very important thing. That is, it's very easy to diffuse the situation if we really wanted. But he has brought another important thing. I think we must take a note of that. He has said that it is not only because of the economic clout that West is, keeping quiet or not reacting to the level that we expect. He is also talking about geostrategy. That the present nexus between America and India and West and India, besides the economic activities, I'm talking about the military, closeness because of the Chinese factor. So that is also keeping them quiet. I think that is very important. And I would like to insert a third factor. And that is that Pakistan is the, largest Muslim country as far as neighborhood of India is concerned. Our own problem is that our own internal political and economic weakness is also emboldening India to do all these things which were difficult for her to do in the past. So we must, keep a tag on all these things. We got to be strong ourselves so that our voice is heard, our voice is paid heed to. Secondly, we must keep in mind that the West and the America will not, really say anything against India as long as they have their not only economic interest but also strategic interest as far as India is concerned.
That's unlikely to change anytime in the future, very close to the future.
So if that is unlikely to change, then don't expect much as far as denouncing whatever they are saying. It might come from some human organizations and all that. It will never come from any government. So that we should understand. It is real politics. This is a real world. But the other two things. One, that the Gulf countries, the OIC, they must spread this message rather than limiting it as a Muslim message. It should be an international reaction. And secondly, what I said, that Pakistan must concentrate on making itself strong internally so that our voice is also heard properly in India and elsewhere.
Right. Nasab, of course, there are two realities that General Sahib talked about. He talked about, one, the reality of India's clout in the world. The second, our own limitations, our own internal situation. Both, unfortunately, are significant in the sense that I don't think they're going to change anytime, if we say tomorrow or day after. It's not good. In that kind of an overall situation, what are some of the measures you feel that can be taken, even if we keep this in mind?
Give me a chance to just make a comment on the geopolitical situation as far as India is concerned.
Okay.
I hope I live long enough to see that my point that India is taking the United States for a ride as far as this strategic alliance is concerned. Under no circumstances is India going to be in conflict with China and destroy itself in the process. It has over $70 billion of trade, and that has not come down. It's still increasing despite the line of actual control problems, etc. So these minor skirmishes might happen, and some of this rhetoric you may see for the consumption of this new strategic partner that they have. However, having said that, a very serious risk in this strategic alliance, and especially with the nexus that the Indians have with the Israelis in sharing security information and satellite data and border control and things like that, the danger is more for Pakistan. If the United States continues to supply them with sophisticated weaponry or sensing equipment and things like that, it is going to be more of a risk for Pakistan than for China. So as far as what they're trying to do, contain so-called China by using India it's not something that's going to work.
Okay.
On the other hand, on the economic side, they would be keen, the Americans would be keen to have a greater investment in India, as they did to strengthen the Chinese economy, to take advantage of the Indian labor force. They would be interested in having large-scale investments in India. But as far as there is conflict between India and Pakistan, no sane, large, serious investor will come to India and invest in a large project as long as there is tension between India and Pakistan.
But that's still happening, isn't that true?
Indeed, indeed, it is happening. But this is something where they would be interested to resolve the issue as far as Kashmir, whatever abrasive issues there are between India and Pakistan.
Okay, let me, Nasir Saab, do you agree with this? I mean, it hasn't, I want to agree with Ambassador Saab, but you know, the other side, of course, we haven't seen it even have any effect on India. We haven't seen it translate, there's no tangible proof of there being any change in India, considering what Ambassador Saab was saying.
I agree to one point what he said, that India is milking America to its advantage. And it's really, really being smart that it goes to Russia as well, it goes to America as well. So
it goes to China also.
There was $70 billion Chinese trade. However, what now, there's a famous Indian scholar, Praveen Soni, his book is just about to be published. Only today I was reading one of his tweets. Now, the Indians are now thinking that China, PLA and Pakistan are talking about interoperability, and that's what is worrying them.
Okay.
The question is, China, we have to understand the Chinese mindset. In the next 100 years also, China is not going to wage a military campaign against any country. Let's face it. It's going to build the best army in the world, the best air force in the world, but it's not going to wage a war. China many years ago realized that if we want to defeat our enemy, we have to defeat them economically. Yes, we have to maintain a very strong military presence. However, we will not go and step into a country. We have and they have demonstrated, they have literally taken America apart. They have done this to every country in Europe and Africa. So that's what the Chinese do. So why would the Chinese just walk away from Indian $70 billion of business? No, they're not going to do that. But they have other ways and means to contain India, and they're doing that. And one of the key, well, they know that they have, the Chinese also understand they have to keep that balance in the region, and that's why the J-10s that we have been given by the Chinese are a manifestation of that. They are 4.5 generation aircrafts, and they are better, or even if not better, equal to the Rafales. Why is China doing that? Because they want to make sure that India does not jeopardize CPAC and BRI. So that's why. But China is not going to fight a war. However, now the thing is, if India is doing this, we also should be smart. When the Prime Minister Imran Khan was going to Russia, and the Russian Consul General only a few days ago in Karachi has himself said, we were on the brink of signing gas and oil and wheat agreements with the Pakistani government. So we are still welcoming Pakistan. It's Pakistan which should now say, all right, what is my interest? Now that's going to go into different, because this is not the topic of today. Coming back, now to contain India or to restrict India from what it is doing, the marginalization of minorities, especially the Muslims and the Christians, that can only happen if there is a unifying bloc that can challenge India and economically hit India. Otherwise, militarily, India has all sources of, building up military bases or buying weapons from all over the world is not. People have been saying to India, there's only one salvation for India is cooperation with Pakistan and China. But Modi, do you think he's going to do it? He's the biggest jingoist. Right. He's not going to do it.
So unless there's a
saner elements in India are saying this. India has no other option but to cooperate with Pakistan and China.
Let me go to John. John, do you think that unless there's a significant change in Indian leadership, we will not be able to, have unsaner elements prevail? We will not see the kind of change one would like. What is Ambassador Saab said, what is Nasir Janjua also is saying the same thing essentially, that unless there is that kind of change in India that one wants to see, saner elements prevail, there is some sort of sanity rather than this extremist rhetoric that is being promoted by BJP, we will not see any positive results emerge.
As a pacifist and a human rights activist, the only way that we have change in India is through elections. India is a Hindu majority country. There are 110 crore Hindus. All the change that can come in a demographic movement cannot be by Muslims, cannot be by Christians or Sikhs. Together we may not even add to 20 crores, which means less than 20% of the population. Therefore, the only target that I and the world must have is to ensure that the sane Hindu, and that is a very big chunk, most Hindus are sane, that they get to see the multiple dangers that this path is taking, of local wars, of economic crisis, of unemployment, of oil crisis, of people being sent back, that all of it registers with them. And that requires diplomacy all over the world. It does not require threats. I'm not saying you say that unless you tomorrow make a Muslim as the president, you're going to cut off trade. No, that will not work, because that's going to put everybody against the wall, and that's not a good place to be. Diplomacy, international opprobrium, naming and shame, together with getting the human rights sensibilities within the very large Hindu fold, who are peaceful people, to see the error, not of their ways, because it's not their way, the error of Mr. Modi's way, the error of the RSS way. And I would like to hope, because not only my life, my grandchildren's life depends on that they will see that, and we will see a change, maybe in the next general election, maybe after that, but that this crisis has to be short term.
Do you think that people are accepting of that? Do you think, because, of course, there is a large Hindu majority, that's also a reality.
A very visible section is doing it, but is that the majority? Is that the majority? Have we tested it in an election? In the recent Rajya Sabha election, BJP won 2 seats by money, by buying Congress people and other people. It did not have the popular support there. I would still like to hope, because there is, otherwise there's total darkness. There's an abyss that the same majority opinion will be the one that will turn at this.
Right.
They will see.
Sir, your quick comments. Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
I wish and pray that whatever John is saying, that comes out to be true. That actual majority is pacifist and they like peace and all that. I would just like to say a word about the possibility of war, which are waging, Chinese waging a war. There's a saying which says that you may not be interested in war, but war may be interested in you. Russia was not in a position to fight, NATO and all that. Still, the war went there. So while Chinese might not be thinking of making war, but there are others who would like to tackle with China right now rather than later. Anyway, saying I would agree with John Saab that we should all try our best from outside and inside to change the things in India. But we'll have to wait what the majority actually makes the decision.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Nasir Ali Khan Saab, thank you for joining us. Nasir Janjua, thank you for being with us. Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us from India, John Dayal. Overall, as far as the situation stands today, certainly we are seeing an outcry all over the world on the blasphemous remarks that were made by BJP, and we're also seeing a kind of reaction come, but of course it's not sufficient. We also spoke a lot about empowering the OIC, which is essential to having any kind of constructive action happen in India. We also spoke about the fact that there's likely, if there is a change in India that rejects the kind of extremism that is brewing at the hands of Modi, will there be a real change? Of course, diplomatic efforts are essential across the board from all Muslim nations, and let's hope that we can do that perhaps under the umbrella of OIC. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.